Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight for It Takes a Village, When Cognition Shifts Roles. This webinar series is brought to you by Can Do Multiple Sclerosis, the National Multiple Sclerosis Society, and the Multiple Sclerosis Society of Canada. My name is Laura Allen, and I will be your moderator this evening. Can Do MS delivers health and wellness education programs to help families with MS thrive. Please visit the Can Do MS website, candoms.org, to learn more about Can Do MS's online and nationwide in-person programs. The mission of the National MS Society is to help people affected by MS live their best lives as they stop MS in its tracks, restore what has been lost, and end MS forever. You can explore other societies' programs, services, resources, and connection opportunities at nationalmssociety.org. We will save about 20 minutes at the end of this webinar for questions and answers. If you have a question during the presentation, you can type it in using the questions chat box found in your control panel on the left side of your screen. I encourage you all to be a part of this interactive discussion. The presentation is being recorded and will be archived on the Can Do MS website. You can also download a copy of tonight's presentation from your control panel. You will also be able to access these resources in the follow-up email that will be sent out by the end of the day tomorrow. Our speakers this evening are Megan Beyer and Darla Freeman. Megan Beyer is a rehabilitation psychologist and clinic researcher specializing in multiple sclerosis at the Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine. Her research and clinical focus is the cognitive and emotional symptoms common in MS. Darla Freeman is a licensed speech-language pathologist certified by the American Speech-Language Hearing Association. She is a graduate of the University of Pittsburgh and received her master's degree in speech-language pathology from the Ohio State University. She has worked with Florida ENT and Allergy for the past 20 years, where she provides services for patients with voice and swallowing disorders. And now, I would like to turn the meeting over to Megan.
Thanks, Laura. So I'm going to start off by talking a little bit about some background information on cognition and how cognition generally impacts people with MS. And then we're going to go into detail in each of these different areas that I'm going to discuss in the next couple of minutes, talk about what those areas are, how they impact relationships, and some tips for how to improve those skills or how to compensate for them. So I want to first start off by talking about how common cognitive symptoms are. Approximately 65% of people with MS will experience some form of cognitive difficulty throughout their lifetime. And these cognitive difficulties don't just come later on in the diagnosis. Approximately 1/3 of people with MS experience cognitive symptoms even before they're diagnosed. So CIS and RIS refers to clinically isolated syndrome or radiologically isolated syndrome. Those are those sort of pre-MS diagnoses. Even when people who are diagnosed with relapsing remitting MS, early in that diagnosis, again, about 1/3 of people have some form of cognitive difficulty. Cognitive symptoms are most common in progressive forms of MS. The functions that are commonly impacted are speed of information processing, attention and concentration, verbal fluency or how quickly you can come up with words in a conversation, learning new information, and executive functionings or planning and organizing. Additionally, sometimes people have difficulties with visual spatial organization, and I kind of think about this as the IKEA effect. Can you go to IKEA and put together a complex piece of furniture, or is that something that's more difficult for you now? So I want to think about these different domains in the form of a pyramid. At the bottom, the most commonly impacted areas for MS our processing speed, attention, and working memory. So we're going to spend some time talking about these things. And I also want to think about these areas as the base of the pyramid because they can impact everything else above it. So if you're having difficulty processing information quickly, that can impact how well you're able to learn new information. So if somebody's talking to you in a conversation and you're only processing a small portion of that conversation, it's going to be a lot harder for you to hear, learn, and remember what that person is saying. So again, we'll talk about this in more detail. So since processing speed is one of the most commonly impacted areas in multiple sclerosis, we're going to start with that. So what is processing speed? Processing speed is the speed at which you can take in and use or respond to information. If somebody's having difficulty with processing speed, this is what it can look like in real life. The person can become overwhelmed by too much information. A lot of times my patients will tell me that they're in a grocery store and they feel completely overwhelmed, or if they're sitting in a restaurant, it's difficult for them to focus on or even switch between what they're hearing behind them and what people are trying to say to them in a conversation at their table. A person may be slow to make decisions or to respond in conversations, might be talking to them. So a support partner might be talking to somebody and they don't respond immediately. So that can be processing speed difficulty. You may need to read information more than once or many times to be able to comprehend what somebody is saying. And it may be difficult, it may take longer to complete tasks. So again, people that I work with will tell me that they used to be able to complete a task in an hour, and now it takes them 2 hours to complete that same task. It may also be difficult for somebody to get started if they're given multiple instructions at once, because again, the brain is processing each of those different instructions at a slower pace. And it may take longer to get out the door in the morning. So let's look at this in a real life example. This is an individual who wrote a blog article, Devin, who was diagnosed with secondary progressive MS in 2000. And Devin says, simply trying to figure out and plan my day can become a big struggle. I very much rely on a routine and my wife to get things done. Otherwise, I can sit for a very long time trying to just figure out what to do first. So again, in this situation, Devin is experiencing processing speed difficulties because it's taking him a long time to process through what to do first. And so in this situation, he's relying on his wife to help prompt him or think through what to do first, second, and third. Again, sort of looking back to one of those examples about responding quickly, this is another way that processing speed might impact relationships in real life. Sue, a support partner, might say, do you want some chicken or pasta for dinner? Bob, the person with MS, looks at her, knows she's speaking, but maybe hasn't fully processed what she said, and then has to think through how he wants to respond. And since he doesn't respond right away, maybe Sue is thinking that he's not paying attention to her, he's not listening, or he's thinking about something else. So she might start to get frustrated and say, Bob, did you hear me? When in reality, he's taking a while to just process through everything that she said and figuring out how to respond. So even though this is the most common difficulty with processing speed, one of the most common cognitive difficulties, one of the problems is that there aren't a ton of ways to improve it at this point. There's lots of research going on, but many times the best way to compensate for processing speed difficulties are to slow down, give yourself time, and to give your family member more time to respond. I have one person who I'm working with now who we just decided that every time she plans something, if it normally would take her an hour, she's going to plan on twice as much time. And that way she knows that she will be able to accomplish that task in that amount of time. So slowing down, giving yourself more time, and giving your family member more time is one way to compensate for processing speed difficulties. There has been one research study both in aging adults and in people with MS that did see some improvements in processing speed. And this is an online brain exercise called Brain HQ. And the specific task that improved processing speed was called double decision. Again, that's double decision. Many of my patients use the free trial of this just to sort of practice a little bit and try to improve their processing speed. So next, let's talk a little bit about attention and concentration. And all of these factors work together in many ways. And so some of what I said about processing speed might come across in attention, and that's because when we are shifting our attention from one piece of information to another, that takes speed. And so there is some interaction between these. So with attention and concentration, I like to think about this in kind of three different ways. One is basic attention. Are you even able to process what you're seeing and hearing? If you can process that basic information, can you switch between information? So can you switch from talking on the phone to writing something down? Can you switch between hearing what is behind you in a restaurant and switching your attention back to the person in front of you? That's complex attention. It's divided. It's switching between information coming at you. And concentration is attending to information for a sustained period of time. So that might be in the midst of a conversation. Can you hold your concentration throughout the entire the conversation? Are you getting distracted by thoughts going on in your own mind or things that are going on in the environment? So when somebody has attention difficulties, this can look like they're making careless mistakes or they're forgetful, that they're having difficulty sustaining concentration during a conversation. Maybe they watch a movie and they might watch the same movie again and not recognize until later on that they've seen that movie before because their attention was distracted the first time they watched it or the second time. People are easily distracted by their environment or their internal thoughts and emotions. Maybe it seems like they're not listening. It might be difficult for them to follow through on plans or instructions. And for women especially, there can be a decrease in interoceptive awareness, and that's their own sustained awareness of their body. And this can actually impact sexual functioning. So attention and cognitive difficulties can impact sexual function as well. So this again is another person with MS who is Callie, who was diagnosed in 2016, who wrote a blog article in 2016. She was diagnosed with relapsing remitting MS when she was 14 years old. And this is what she has to say about how attention and concentration impacts her relationships. So she said, over the years, I have found that when it comes to my attention span, well, I'm a little all over the place. An example would be when I'm trying to do housework and my husband is trying to talk to me. It's not that I can't talk or do things at the same time. However, if you're trying to relay some of the important information to me when I'm elbows deep in housework, it may not be the best time. And I say this because at the time I'm so focused on my current task that it may take me a second to register the importance of what someone is telling me. It can be difficult for me to switch my attention back and forth between completing tasks, especially when one of those tasks is talking. And then she sort of says, hello, divided attention. So she really lays out exactly what I just said and what we know in research, how this really impacts day-to-day life and her relationship with her husband. So what can we do about this? Number one, reduce environmental distractions. If you're having an important conversation, just like Callie said, turn off the TV, turn off the radio, ask your kids to go in the other room. Make sure that you're not going to be distracted by the environment. When you're having an important conversation, repeat what you're hearing, ask questions, take notes. And one reason to do this is because that really makes you pay attention to what's happening. If you repeat back what you're hearing, then you can check with that person to understand that you've heard them correctly. If you're taking notes and asking questions, it makes sure that that internal monologue doesn't distract you, or those internal thoughts. Use organizational strategies as much as possible. Minimize activities that take you off task. So for example, if you're at work and every time you hear that ping on your email, that distracts you and completely derails you, then turn that ping off or turn that alert off and only check your email at certain times during the day. Use something that's called verbal rehearsal. This is something that's been proven in research. Again, it makes your attention come to the task that you're doing. So talk yourself through steps out loud. Starting out loud, you can eventually start to do it in your head as you get good at it, but I would start out loud. So if you've ever left the stove on, or I had one person who told me they took a letter to the mailbox and couldn't remember if they actually put the letter in the mailbox or not, or if they had left it in the house. So for these kinds of things that maybe are seemingly small but are big deals, what you want to do is just talk that out loud. I just turned off the stove. I just turned off the lights. I just put the mail in the mailbox. I parked under the yellow tree in the third row back from the restaurant. So if you kind of say these things out loud, it helps solidify it in your memory and bring your attention to that task. And more and more research is pointing that mindfulness meditation can actually impact and improve your attention and concentration as well. There was one study that looked at 4 days of mindfulness meditation training enhanced people's ability to sustain their attention over time. So this is great news. So I'll turn it over to Darla now.
Thank you, Megan. What a wonderful foundation to our presentation this evening. And what I really love so much about the information you presented, it shows such a close connection to both language and memory. And so I have an opportunity to also, really give that information in some situations again. But let's look at what exactly we think language is. Well, we know language is definitely a system by which we communicate. It's a system of sounds, it's a system of written symbols as well. But not only is it what we hear and what we say, it can also be languages through how we appear pragmatically. You know how people can tell your expression is just written on your face. How people can come up to you and say, you look like you're sad, what's going on? And you haven't even spoken a word yet. So your face can tell a lot. In a nutshell, language really is how we express ourselves to one another and our ability to receive and understand that message. And we know it varies across countries, across and within communities as well. Now, how does language exactly impact your relationships? I know that there are many people listening in today that can really connect with this. They're in a conversation and they say, wow, I just lost that word, or what's that called? And we talked about that as a word-finding issue, typically called anomia. But in recent studies, they've also found a connection with the term aphasia. Aphasia also means the loss of words. And until recently, it was not considered a clinical manifestation of multiple sclerosis because MS primarily affects the white matter of the brain and spinal cord, while aphasia is typically associated with diseases of gray matter. However, in a recent multi-center study that investigated the prevalence of aphasia in MS, we found that nearly 40% of individuals with MS demonstrate markedly reduced word-finding skills. So aphasic disorders may be observed in two different situations with multiple sclerosis. Now, the most common situation is experiencing difficulty generating the names of people, places, and things over the disease course, while the second situation is experiencing an acute aphasia or word-finding difficulty during or following an exacerbation. Now, I was looking at a Momentum article, and someone commented in the article that in many cases it's just difficult to hold a conversation. It can be very exasperating, especially for someone who's very social. The person, which was Miss Gilly, she commented that I enjoy talking to people, but it can be hard to carry on a conversation. I repeat myself a lot because I'm trying to find the words that I want to say. So we want you to know that in our research, we are really supportive of what's happening with word finding. So I pulled this figure out that looks at a comparison delay in replying in different stages of multiple sclerosis against a control group. So this study actually looked at 47 MS patients, 29 were healthy controls, and I always ask questions because with Megan talking to us about attention and concentration, I wanted to find out first that were any of these patients having that difficulty, and no one did. So everyone was cleared as far as not having any challenges with any types of things such as a lack of a language disorder. There was no drug dependency, no alcoholism, etc. And we can all see here in this graph that when a patient was asked to identify very familiar animals, objects, and fruits, the multiple sclerosis patients always had an increased reaction time. And so that tells us it's key that processing speed that Megan was just talking about, that also plays such a big hand into a patient or person's ability to actually recognize names and retrieve those names. Now, I want to get a little bit more specific, though, about the different levels of word finding and where you can have some challenges with word finding. So if we first look at the word level, this is just having a difficult time recalling single words, especially in confrontation naming. Now, confrontation naming is simply looking at a picture and having to name it, and that can be challenging. At the sentence level, just forming what you want to say. And with that being a challenge, what can happen is there are empty pauses. Your speech may be repetitive. There may be a lot of ums, ohs, those are fillers. Or there may be the need to actually substitute a whole phrase because you could not come up with what you were trying to say. At the conversational level, just keeping up the pace of the conversation. So if we think back to what Megan said to us, not only might we have the problem with attending as well as processing what the other person said, but we may have a difficult time actually expressing ourselves to keep up with the pace of conversation. So what will that do to your interactions? It could actually reduce your conversational interactions. Now, what are some strategies to improve language? And I know someone on the call had asked a question about apps like Cognition, and do they actually improve memory? Well, our research does not show us that it has a significant improvement, but it does have a significant overlay on just keeping up. So work at word finding, reading, puzzles, and daily interactions will keep you thinking. Giving yourself a hint. Let's look at two types of useful cues to improve word finding skills. One is a phonemic cue. That means try to generate the first letter or sound of the missing word, because hearing the sound can actually help trigger your memory. So when I work with patients with this actual technique, and even I use this myself, and that is I kind of go through the alphabet trying to look for the sound or see that letter that can maybe help me. Like, I want a bowl of, I'm trying to guess what that is, and I might think this, and that'll get me to sugar. The second type of cue is a semantic cue, trying to think of the category that that word belongs within. Is it a food? Is it a place? Is it something in your kitchen? Describing or giving a particular background for the intended word. And this is sometimes where your care partner, significant other, will come in and they may help you in trying to determine what the word is that you're trying to say. So within language processing, attention, we know one of our largest foundations for that is memory. So we have to have attention and concentration, good language. All these things are going to dovetail into working with your memory. So what exactly is memory? I think we all have a sense of what we think memory is. And this diagram will go through the different types of human memory. And I'm going to take a little bit of time to explain this and then how it impacts relationships. So within our human memory, we have our sensory memory, which is grasping something in less than a second. Our short-term memory, or what you oftentimes will be heard as your working memory, this is something that's occurring right now. You're getting short-term memory right now. You're learning new information, and you're trying to process that in under a minute. Your long-term memory is something that stays around with you for life. That's the ultimate goal. And that's why you might say, hey, I can remember things that I did before, but I can't remember things that just happened 2 minutes ago. When we look at long-term memory, though, that does break down, and you can see the branches there, into two different types of memory. First, we have implicit memory, and this is something that's very unconscious to you. It's a procedural memory, something that you could just tie your shoe or go turn on the TV or do something that you do all the time. It's very unconscious, very rote. But that's opposite of explicit memory, which is more of a conscious memory. And that branches to declarative memory because we're learning facts, we're learning events. And within learning those facts and events, they're either going to be episodic or they're going to be semantic. And episodic, those are events and experiences, but the semantic memory are facts and concepts. So looking at memory, how does that impact your relationships? Well, it impacts your relationships because things that you typically do, and I think Megan gave some wonderful examples of comments that people said. Like, I think the one gentleman was, he could just sit there all day. He really depends on his wife to help him to get organized and to get going within the day. That is what this particular slide represents. It's talking about our activities of daily living versus our instrumental activities of daily living. So instrumental activities of daily living, we refer to that as SCUM. I'm going to say the word, guys, SCUM. It's shopping, cooking, cleaning, using the telephone or transportation, managing money, and medications. You may find that you need assistance with that. But with just ADLs, activities of daily living, some of those things can be very procedural, like in house cleaning or doing laundry or, putting on your clothes and all those little things that you do every single day. They're very individual to you, and what it does is being able to complete these things will make you live and allow you to live independently within your community, within your home. So things like following a familiar recipe, keeping track of a calendar, these things may become a challenge. And so your role as an independent partner in a relationship could be impacted because now you may rely on other people to assist you with within those areas. So what are some ways that we can improve our memory? Well, first we're going to look at restorative activities, and that can include many different exercises. But before I go over those, I just want to add in some other information. First thing you want to do is you want to speak to your doctor. And I know some people have also sent in questions. How do I know? Is this normal aging? Is this MS? Am I maybe having a touch of dementia or Alzheimer's? I know those things are in everybody's minds. So your first key point is to talk to your doctor, because your doctor can make sure that your problems with your memory do not come from things like normal aging or drugs, because some drugs that you're taking may cause confusion, depression, anxiety, or fatigue. Once you have any health problems fully treated, the next step is usually for you to be seen by someone to test your memory. And that's usually with a neuropsychologist, sometimes it's with a speech pathologist, or even an occupational therapist. It's possible but rare that thinking problems become so severe that someone with MS needs constant care or can't live on their own. But if this does become an issue, you would discuss your options with your doctor and family. A social worker or psychologist can also help explore options for care. But there are studies that are being happening at this point in time that are looking at whether the drugs that slow the nerve damage for MS can help with other problems too. So that is really the foundation of your memory if you want to know, is this just a memory problem, normal aging, or something else? We urge you to have that conversation with your physician. So, getting back to the restorative activities. Combining modes of learning, I find this to be one of the most successful things for my patients, because we are very used to learning things in one modality, but we need to explore, see it, say it, hear it, write it, do it. It's okay to give yourself extra time, because the way you put information in is going to be so instrumental into how you get the information out. I think Megan talked about this one, repeat and verify. Repeat what you think you heard someone say, verify that it's correct, and that will not only help with your memory, but you get a little icing on top of the cake. You get to also get some attention improvement. Space rehearsal, which I believe we talked about already as well, repeating and practicing information at intervals. I think this one of, going to the grocery store and you have a really short list. I might say cat, cabbage, asparagus, and tomatoes. And I might say that every 30 seconds to a minute until I get into the store, and then I have my small list and I know what I need. Building associations. Use memory aids. Please use those. That's what they're there for. Example, to remember a name of a person you just met, associate his or her name with maybe a friend or a family member that you know has the same name, maybe with a place, a color, or event that sounds like the new name. There are compensatory activities as well that can help make up for functions that are no longer working. These include consolidate and centralize, have a grand information center. But Megan had mentioned earlier too, this center has to be organized. It can't be everything everywhere. And what we suggest for you to have in that center is a master calendar. You can place your mail, your bills, any messages, your to-do list, your keys, wallets. It's endless. It's whatever you want, but the key would be keep it organized so that you don't have to try to remember where everything is. Planning is significantly important. Post a large calendar for everyone in your family to be able to see. You want to keep your appointments there, your activities, anything you're going to be doing socially. It's a great way to keep yourself reminded. Also, have pens, markers, have everything right there. Some people like to use the computer better, so use a computer program. Set it up with reminders for routine tasks, and if you're savvy enough, you can synchronize it with your mobile device so that you can have your appointments with you all the time on the go. Recording. Most of our phones do have an audio recording capability, so dictate your to-do list. Do notes or other things to remember that on a digital recorder. Other improvement strategies, remind yourself. Use those checklists, alarms, use your watch, your phone, a timer, anything that can help give you that external reminder. We talked about this one, eliminating or removing yourself from distractions. Turn off that TV, music, whatever else is on when speaking with someone in person or on the phone. Background and visual and noise distractions can make learning or remembering so much more difficult. And if you can't eliminate that distraction, like if you're out in a situation where people are talking, like at a party or at a mall, then ask the person you're communicating with, can we talk in a quieter place? Why? You want to have better attention, better concentration. That'll allow you to remember better, and it'll also help those word-finding skills that I talked about earlier. Take that break. When we're tired, our brains are tired. So if you're having difficulty concentrating, take a breath and refresh. Do one thing at a time. Multitasking is not advantageous to you. Avoid switching back and forth from one topic or task to another. So if you're doing the laundry, do the laundry. Don't try to do the laundry and cook dinner at the same time. Finish or find an appropriate stopping place on what you're working on before you switch to something else. And now Megan's going to move on and talk to us a little bit more, and we're going to focus on executive functioning.
Thanks so much, Darla. I wanted to also piggyback on something that Darla said earlier about talking to your doctor. I think this is a really important point. I regularly get questions from people about whether or not the symptoms they're experiencing are normal, or whether they're due to MS, or whether they're due to some other factor like an Alzheimer's kind of picture, which is rare in people with MS. Right now, the MS Society has recently published national recommendations that every single person with MS should get yearly screening for their cognition, although this isn't happening very often. In at least one study, only 20% of doctors were doing cognitive screening on a regular basis. And so not only the MS Society is trying to get these recommendations out there and screening cognition regularly, but if we have individuals with MS asking for that screening, it's going to be more common, and you're going to get those symptoms picked up on earlier and addressed earlier. And the earlier you address them, the better. So again, if you're not getting regular screening, or you have questions about this, just like Darla said, talk to your doctor about it. Executive functioning. Executive functioning is kind of an umbrella term for a lot of different things that we do. It's your ability to manage yourself or your resources to execute or perform a task. I like to think of executive functioning as, some people think of executive functioning as like the CEO, or the CEO who runs an entire business. But I like to think of executive functioning as kind of the coaching staff for a football team. Each part of that coaching staff is helping to direct the entire team to work as a cohesive unit in order to reach that end goal. And that's what our brains are doing all the time. So pulling together all of these different areas, attention, concentration, processing speed, memory, our brains are picking up all of these resources and putting them together in a cohesive unit to accomplish some sort of task. So let me talk a little bit more in a real-world example of all the different pieces of executive functioning for a simple task. So imagine that you have a dinner reservation. You need to use time management skills, or predicting how much time you need, to give yourself enough time to get ready, get yourself dressed, get yourself showered, and drive to the restaurant. So if you're having difficulty with time management, you're not even going to be able to get out the door on time, right? This task also requires planning and prioritizing. What do you need to do first, second, and third? Are you going to get dressed first, or are you going to shower first, right? So your brain has to organize the order in which everything has to happen. Then you need to initiate getting ready. So initiation Some people have difficulty with initiation, so they know that they need to do something, they know what they need to do, but they just can't quite get themselves going, so that initiation can be really difficult. Sometimes we get sidetracked, right? We're thinking about something else or somebody distracts us, so we need to be able to self-monitor or look internally and notice that we've gone off task. Then you need to reorient yourself to the end goal. So without that self-monitoring, you might just get pulled off task completely. As you're walking to the car, you might walk through the kitchen, and you might notice that there's some really good cookies sitting on the counter. So you might have to inhibit an impulse to walk over to the counter and start eating those cookies. Otherwise, your dinner is going to get ruined. You also need to, ahead of time, organize your outings by putting them on your phone calendar, or like Darla was saying, have everything sort of planned out ahead of time. And let's say that something goes wrong, right? You look at your calendar and you notice that you didn't write down the address to the restaurant. And so you start panicking. Oh, where is this? How am I going to get there? So that emotional control, or being able to tamp down those emotions that pop up, is also a part of executive functioning. Then you need to be able to think flexibly and brainstorm different ways to find the missing address, or to problem solve through any problems or barriers that arise during completing a task. So as we can see, executive functioning is a lot of different things working together to be able to complete one task. And this is a somewhat simple task, and many of us do much more complex things throughout the day. So there are strategies for improving each of these different areas that I've underlined, and so I'm going to talk through them here. If you're having difficulty with time management, one thing to do is to become more aware of how long it's taking you to do things. You might try something like a timed timer, and that is kind of a visual cue that your time is ticking away, rather than just kind of glancing at the clock every so often. I had somebody the other day tell me that they looked at their watch, they had a meeting to go to, and they thought they had plenty of time. They looked back at their watch and they were 5 minutes late already, right? So their perception of time was a little bit off. With a time timer, you can kind of make it external and watch that perception of time. You might also try a self-monitoring task to see how long it's taking you now. So if that processing speed is getting in the way and it's taking you longer to get out the door, and so your predictions are taking longer, then you might want to practice a self-monitoring task to see how long it's really taking you. So you might want to say, okay, I need to take a shower. How long do I think this is going to take? And I think it's going to take 10 minutes. How long did it actually take? Well, it actually took me 20 minutes. So if you start doing this, you might be able to start planning your day in a little more of a realistic way. Self-monitoring. So self-monitoring can be used on almost anything. It can be used on your emotions, so that's just being aware of what emotions are coming up for you. What are the behaviors that you're doing? Do you notice what your behaviors are early on, or are they you're not noticing in them until later? Have you noticed when you've gone off task? Have you monitored what's going on when you're having difficulty sleeping, or the things that trigger fatigue for you? So one example of using self-monitoring for seeing if attention is impacting your reading, for example, is if you're reading a page in a book or an article and you want to see how many times you're going off task and what's causing you to go off task, you might just make a little tick mark at the top of each at the top of the page each time you've gone off task or you've noticed you've gone off task. And the next step might be to think about, what is it that's pulling your attention away? Is it something in your environment, or is it something that's going on in your mind? And becoming more aware of what's happening for you can help you come up with solutions for how to fix it. So this is also some of these things might be helpful for you to work with a speech pathologist like Darla, or an occupational therapist, or even sometimes a neuropsychologist or a psychologist can help you sort of work through a lot of these different suggestions that we're giving you. Speaking about self-monitoring for emotional control, because that's something that I notice with a lot of the people that I work with. So when you have those cognitive lapses, are you having panic moments? Are you thinking really negative or dire thoughts about those cognitive lapses? Because I don't want to minimize the cognitive strategy or cognitive issues that people are having. They're serious and they're impactful, and they really do impact people's lives. But that emotional reaction can cause almost expound, or it can make a worse problem. So if you're having difficulty concentrating, and then you're having this internal monologue that is saying, I can't concentrate, why can't I concentrate, what's causing this, then that can impact your attention and concentration even more. So it might be helpful to start tracking when you're having these emotional outbursts. What's going on? What's triggering it? How did you feel? What are the thoughts that are going on? And are there ways to reduce the emotional reaction so you can think more clearly and try to problem solve through those difficult situations? Practice relaxation strategies such as deep breathing or autogenic training. That's kind of working through each muscle group and noticing if it's tense and then relaxing it, and even using something like guided imagery. So those relaxation techniques can help you become more aware of your emotions and your body and be a really important self-monitoring tool. As Darla's already said, increasing your organization using calendars and to-do lists can really help with executive functioning. And like she said already, have a designated spot or a memory bowl to put really important items like your keys, your glasses, your wallet, so that they don't get lost around the house. You're putting it in the same place every day, so you don't have to think about where it is and run around the house trying to figure out where your keys are. Break down big tasks into smaller, more manageable chunks. And this can help with both the emotional side of things as well as planning and organizing. Just like I had for getting out the door to this dinner reservation, broke that down into multiple different pieces, you can do that with tasks around your house as well. Or if you start to feel overwhelmed, take a step back and just chunk out each part of the overall task. And one other thing is if you are tasked with something, one really important tip that I give people is to either do it in that moment, write it down, or forget it, or it will be forgotten. So if you're hearing something that you need to remember, either do it in the moment if you can, write it down somewhere as Darla suggested, or it's likely that you will forget it. So initiation, so that's that kind of that get up and go. This is not super common in MS, but it does happen. So it may be helpful to get some external cues. So ask a family member to cue you when it's time to start a new task, or to maybe get up and go, or to start getting ready. Alternatively, if you don't want to ask a family member, then you could set a phone alarm or have some sort of external trigger to help you get up and go. Maybe even test yourself on this to try and increase your initiation. So if you need to wash the dishes, set a 5-minute timer and see if you can get to the sink and start washing the dishes before the timer goes off. And reduce that time by 30 seconds each time you're successful, and this might help you with initiation. Another thing that I like to tell people to practice is flexible thinking versus rigid thinking. Sometimes what can happen is that when we get in those panic moments or we're having a lot of cognitive lapses, it's really hard to problem solve through a difficult situation. So when you're not in an emotionally triggering situation, practice flexible thinking. Try noticing a problem, a small problem that you have in your life, and brainstorming as many different solutions to the problem as you can. Write down every solution, whether it's silly or not, and then go through the list and pick out a solution to try. And so just using that exercise of brainstorming, flexible thinking can help you be more flexible in an emotionally triggering situation. So that's what I have to say about executive functioning, and we're excited to answer some of your questions now. I'm going to turn it back to Laura.
All right, thanks, Megan. You know, we talked a lot about the perspective of the person with MS. So one of the questions that we received what are some of the ways that a partner can be supportive of an MS patient with cognitive dysfunction? My MS partner looks great. People take it for granted that she's A-OK. What can I do to support her?
This is Darla, and I'll comment on that. I would say one of the biggest key to me is to have patience and to let your MS significant other guide you into letting you know what they need. Oftentimes we try to jump so quickly into offering assistance that the person does not yet want us to do, especially when it comes to how they organize, how they're thinking, things that have to be done. So serve and guide gently as being someone there that's there to assist. So if, let's say, they need to do their calendar, first ask, would you like me to help you with your calendar? Here are some ideas that I have. So, all the information we gave here, I think care partners and significant others need to understand all the types of compensatory strategies so that they are there available to assist in a comfortable atmosphere.
Yeah, I'd like to piggyback on what Darla said and just say, having open communication about what you're noticing as a support partner, and then asking for permission or asking for an open discussion of how they want you to help would be really helpful. And having open communication is really important because how they might want you to help today might be different than how they want you to help tomorrow. And so checking in regularly and saying, how are you feeling? When you're feeling this way, do you want me to do more? And when you're feeling that way, do you want me to do less? So keeping that dialogue open will be really helpful.
And remembering that what you think is right may not always be right for that person.
Exactly.
I just helped a couple, as a matter of fact, where the person with multiple sclerosis wanted to leave their, in the memory bowl, they wanted to leave their keys, their glasses, and everything, whereas the wife said, no, I think you need to have a pair of glasses beside everywhere you're at. I want one on the counter beside your computer, beside your bed, and the emotional energy that was spent on making that decision was more harmful than it was helpful.
Great, thank you for that explanation. Keeping on the line of perspective, we talked a lot about partners together, but what about those that are single and don't have a support partner? Can you address strategies for a single person when they have to manage their household and their work and applying for jobs and all that having MS entails from a cognitive standpoint?
Yes, so this is Megan. I think a good first step is to maybe, hopefully we've provided some strategies in each of those different domains as a starting point. But one thing I would say is that if you're having difficulties managing with cognitive symptoms and you're single or you don't have somebody who may be helping, it is really helpful to sit down with somebody who, like Darla, who's a speech pathologist, or an occupational therapist who specializes in cognition, or again, a psychologist that specializes in cognition. Sit down with one of those individuals and go through the problems that you're having, and they can create a specialized program for you of compensatory strategies that will work for your life, and maybe even improve those symptoms with some exercises as well. So that would be a really good starting point if the tips that we've given today, or the tips that are kind of available out on the internet, are not helpful. So again, it's kind of like a personal trainer, right? You're working with somebody one-on-one who's going to help you create a plan that's individualized to you and your life.
This is Darla. Being a speech pathologist who has been involved in several multiple sclerosis support groups for many years, I say look at outreach. I've watched so many relationships that have just blossomed from support groups, from reaching out to your neighbors, from speaking to your friends at churches, that you would be surprised how many people are just excited and happy to be involved to help you with daily things, as we've been talking about. So that would be my suggestion, is if you're not in a support group already and you're a single person, try to find your local support groups. There are people there that have been in those groups for many, many years to people that are brand new, and they are very much willing to help you come to a support group, help you find a doctor, teach you systems they've used. So just do some outreach.
Great, thank you. We just had a question about how do you refuse help in a friendly manner?
Yeah, I mean that's a difficult question, because each relationship is a little bit different. But I think having boundaries is really important, because when we start to feel resentful, that's a cue that boundaries in some way have been violated, and that's actually a personal cue for ourselves that we should solidify those boundaries, or discuss openly what the difficulties are. And so what I would say is approach that person in as friendly a manner as you can, and say, identify the behavior that is unwanted. So the other day when I was talking, I paused for a minute and I was thinking for a word, and you jumped in, and actually it helps me a lot if you would just pause and let me think for a few minutes. That really helps me actually keep my cognition fresh and practice those exercises. And so that's what I'd like you to do in the future. So just kind of identifying the behavior, not putting them down for it, not, identifying. You might even acknowledge that person might feel slighted. I know that you might feel slighted when I say this, and that's not my intention. However, it's really important to me if you do X instead of Y. Darla, do you have any other thoughts?
Really just first starting with always saying thank you, and maybe asking them, what made them want to help in that way. Mm-hmm. Because sometimes, your partner is getting a little bit frustrated, so sometimes it's good to just find out what they were thinking, but sometimes also they just want to be helpful. So like you're saying, Megan, recognize that, acknowledge it, but also in as gentle a way possible, letting them know, I want to preserve my independence, and this is one of the ways I can preserve my independence with thinking, remembering, organizing, saying the things I want to say. So that's some of the advice I would give.
Great, thanks, Darla. Both Megan and Darla, you both talked about removing environmental distractions, and in many situations that works. You can turn the TV off, or you can do things of that nature. But what about when you're in a restaurant? One of our participants noted that when he's in a restaurant, he can hear people all over the restaurant, but he has difficulty concentrating on the conversation with the person that he is with.
Mm.
I'll let you start, Darla, if you have any initial
thoughts. Kind of a tough one. I think, I don't like to tell people to choose the restaurants you go to, because we should all have the freedom to go wherever we want to eat. But the one thing that I tell my patients, because obviously I deal with MS and all kind of communication disorders, is ask your server or ask the hostess to place you in an area with the least amount of distractions, either through making a reservation ahead of time or when you arrive. Just be willing and say, we can wait, but we need a table that is in a corner. The other thing is, depending on how comfortable you feel with the person you're with, instead of sitting across the table from them, maybe sit beside them. Like if it's a booth, sit beside them so that you can turn to them. You can see facial expression. They can repeat to you. If they have to say something closer to you, it's not reaching across the table. You're beside one another.
Yeah, I agree with all of those things. I think, one additional thing that might be helpful is, again, the strategy that Darla brought up earlier of repeating what you hear can help try to block out that extraneous noise in the background. So, or, even sort of, if you would like to, kind of jotting things down in the moment to try and keep your attention on what's being said. But one thing I might say is practice just repeating back a couple of words that you hear from what the person is saying, and that might keep your attention for a little longer on what the individual is saying. It's also kind of a strategy that people feel it not only helps you with attention, but if you repeat back what people say, it's a strategy that makes them feel heard and makes them feel really good. So it's also a way of connecting interpersonally as well. So it's cognition and interpersonal skills to do that.
Yeah, definitely. And I wanted to add one more thing, that if you do have the opportunity to sit in the back of a restaurant, turn your back to the rest of the restaurant so that now you don't have a visual distraction as well as an auditory distraction. You can be able to focus on the person that you're with.
Great ideas. We did have a couple of participants note a focus issue when listening to people talk. Do you have any strategies for how to keep your focus while in a conversation?
I think one of the biggest reasons why you may have a difficult time focusing is because people have a tendency to speak so fast. So you have to really think about who's talking to you. If this person is a fast talker, if this is a person perhaps that kind of goes all over the place and they don't keep this, they can't maintain the topic, that's a discussion. That is asking, letting them know, I want to participate in this conversation with you, but, can you slow down your rate of speech? I think getting that processing speed is really what impacts patients, but I know it's a hard thing, but just letting someone know as nicely as you can, I really need you to slow down, or if they're talking about a topic, doing the repeating what they're saying, doing some interjections, that may also help with the processing speed so you can attend and concentrate a little better.
Yeah, the only other thing that I would add to that is maybe asking questions too. That might help with maintaining your concentration. But again, it might be just asking that person to slow down so that you can keep up with the conversation.
Great. I do want to move on to we've gotten some questions about cognitive issues at work. But before I do that, I would like to ask, we had a question about the when do people that are diagnosed with MS typically find themselves experiencing cognitive issues? Is it early in the diagnosis, or is it later in that process?
So yes and yes. About a third of people with MS, about 20% to a third of people with MS will experience cognitive symptoms even before they're diagnosed. And so, or very early in the disease, soon after they're diagnosed. But cognitive difficulties become more frequent as people age and as they live with the disease for longer. So the most common cognitive difficulties are in people with secondary progressive MS, and that's because they've sort of lived through relapsing remitting MS, and now they've transitioned to secondary progressive MS, so they've lived with the disease for a long time, and so they might have had an accumulation of cognitive changes. So to summarize, about a third of people, even before they're diagnosed or shortly after they're diagnosed, may experience some cognitive symptoms, but it's most common as people live with it for a longer period of time.
Great. So cognitive issues become apparent at work. So when you're struggling with cognitive issues in the workplace, how do you explain the need for a more broken down list of tasks without seeming that you're incapable of doing your job?
So this is also a little bit tricky because it depends on the workplace. Some workplaces are very open to accommodation requests, and if that is your environment, you have a boss or a managerial team that is supportive, knows your diagnosis, and is willing to work with you, then it might be working through accommodation requests. And you might start with working with a neuropsychologist who does testing or a speech pathologist who does testing, figuring out what accommodations might be most helpful to you. So which domains are actually being impacted, and how can those domains be adequately accommodated at work. There's a great resource online. It's called the Job Accommodation Network. If you just Google JAN, G-A-N, or Job Accommodation Network, it's a free resource for everybody who has, anybody who has any form of disability. They have lawyers on staff for free that you can consult with about how to make accommodation requests, what happens if your work is not accommodating those requests, and all kinds of different strategies for all different types of accommodations that might be helpful to you. If you're in an environment that's not supportive, that's a little bit more difficult. And I think working with your medical team closely in those situations might be really helpful to figure out how to ask for things. But a lot of times the accommodations that I find are most helpful for people are just saying, I'm getting a little older and more forgetful, blame it on something else, or, I have mom brain, or, whatever you want to blame it on if you don't want to tell them that you have a diagnosis of MS. Would you mind emailing that to me? Or would you mind when you send, when there's tasks that we need to do, could you send them to me by email so that I make sure that I put them on my to-do list? And then it sort of looks like you're being proactive about getting tasks accomplished. Darla, do you have additional thoughts?
No, I really don't. I agree with the being proactive. That's the first thing that came to my mind, is being proactive. And thank you for the resource, because I didn't know about JAN. So yeah. I'll definitely be looking that up myself.
Yeah, they're a great resource. Absolutely. And you can call them and talk to them at any point. Again, 100% completely free. So it's a really great resource if you have any questions about work accommodations.
Great. Megan, I have a participant who experiences being invisible. What about when people ignore you and look past you because they think you can't answer, like when you're ordering at a restaurant or buying something in a store, etc.?
So one thing that I might do is one of two things. Practice assertiveness And one way to start that is start small. So let's say if you're ordering in a restaurant, take a few minutes before the waiter gets there and think through what you want to request and how you want to request it and what the words are that you want to use, so they're kind of in your mind, in your working memory, ready to go when that person comes. And be assertive. If they sort of look past you, then call their attention to you and request the thing that you need. If there's another person that you're with who is sort of jumping in and trying to help but is maybe doing too much and that's causing you to feel invisible, then it might be having a conversation with that person about, as Darla said earlier, what you need and what's not helpful.
You know, we're getting close to wrapping up, but we did have a couple of questions about testing. And can one of you review what tests you think that are good to get done when you're experiencing cognitive issues, and any tricks that you know of to get insurance to help pay for these costs? You know, when some people have experienced insurance saying no to these tests.
Well, typically I know in the speech pathology arena, you know, a diagnostic evaluation is usually approved by all insurance companies. And what we're going to be looking at are just, you know, different levels of cognition and also word finding. So one of the tests we may do is a cognitive linguistic quick test. And that covers a lot of dimensions, obviously, of cognition, language, including word finding. And that's one I'm just mentioning off the top of my head. The ones that are used that are pretty quick within maybe your neurologist's office or even within a community, because I know there are some free screening offerings. I'm in Tampa in the University of South Florida at the Bird Institute. They will give some free screenings, and we use the MoCA, which is the Montreal Cognitive Assessment. Now, that's a screener. It's free. It can be downloaded and administered by just about anyone. So if you get a screener, you may definitely run into having some insurance problems, because I know, for instance, Medicare won't pay for you to have your cognition or language screened, but they typically pay for a full battery. Those batteries, the battery of tests can take anywhere from, you know, a quick test, 30 minutes, up to 60 minutes, but all the modalities that Megan and I have talked about, they will cover. So it'll cover your processing speed, your attention, concentration, memory, and language. So it really just depends on what your physician is looking for. And in my area of my profession, it depends on what tests we have available within our clinic and what we're trying to achieve, how we're trying to set up your treatment for you.
So, just adding a little bit more to that, in your neurologist's office, one of the problems is that the quick screeners aren't always reimbursed. So that's one reason that they're not doing them as frequently as we all want them to. However, there's been some new tools that have come out relatively recently in the past couple of years that neurologists and any physician has access to for free. One of them is called Processing Speed Test, or the PST. And as I said, the most common difficulty in MS is processing speed. So anything that measures reaction time is a really good place to start. This PST is completely free. It's downloadable on the iTunes, but I do believe that you need some sort of medical degree to access it. So if you could ask your provider if they have access to that test, and if not, if they could look into it for your next visit, because it is something that you could do in the waiting room while you're waiting for the doctor, or in the doctor's office while you're waiting for them to come in. And so that's a kind of one option. this is very preliminary, so I want to say that ahead of time, and that we're still doing some assessments. But accessing cognitive tests is a really big passion of mine, and I want to identify more tools, or I think all of us in this field should identify more tools that people have access to, regardless of their financial status or insurance status. So one resource that we just completed a pilot test on is something called Test My Brain. So if you just Google Test My Brain, it's a group of tests that have been developed by neuroscientists at Harvard. And we recently tested a few of these in a few of the subtests in people with MS, and they seem to be working just as well as our paper-based tests. So again, very preliminary studies, haven't published it yet. We're working on that now, but it is free and accessible by anybody by going to testmybrain.com or .org. I can't remember, but if you just Google Test My Brain, you'll find it. And again, the MOCA, as Darla said, is completely free. So those are all screening options that are completely free, and your doctor or you can access. If the insurance company is turning down neuropsychological assessments, you can ask for a peer-to-peer, which means that your doctor or a provider can have a conversation with your insurance company to try and advocate for you. So that's something to request from your doctor's office. Ask them to do a peer-to-peer with the insurance company to see if they can get it paid for. If they won't pay for the neuropsychological tests, then again, as Darla said, speech pathology is usually is across the board paid for more than our services are. And so I would consider going to a speech pathologist or an occupational therapist who has experience with cognition, because they can do an assessment of cognition as well that will be paid for.
Great. Thanks, Megan. So it looks like we're just about out of time. First of all, I want to thank Megan and Darla for some terrific information and resources that you both provided this evening. Is there anything you want to add before we close up?
I don't think so.
No, I don't have anything else additional.
Great. Well, thank you both. It was a very informative webinar. Lots to think about. And with that, I'd like to inform you of some additional resources that you might find informative and helpful. On the Can Do MS website, cando-ms.org, you'll find the archive webinars, and tonight's webinar will be posted by the end of the day tomorrow. Well, we also have our e-news and library articles. There is a library article on this topic in our website as well that Megan and Darla authored. And you can also access our Can Do on demand. I would also like to highlight some resources that are available from the National MS Society. They have a variety of brochures and video segments that can be accessed on their website, which is nationalmssociety.org. And you can also contact an MS navigator at 1-800-FIGHT-MS. That is a terrific resource that is available. If you did find this webinar to be valuable, please consider donating to Can Do MS or the National MS Society. In addition, you can start a personal Kick MS fundraiser. You can ask for donations instead of gifts. You can have a bake sale, or you can walk around a 5K. Anything goes. I would also like to mention MS Path to Care. It is a resource that is available to you, which is an initiative with content created by Can Do MS, focusing on shared decision-making in healthcare experiences, as well as overall health and wellness. So you can visit MS Path to Care at mspath2care.com. The next presentation in our webinar series will be on Tuesday, June 11th at the same time, 8 p.m. Eastern, and it's going to be on enjoying leisure and recreation. As always, you can register for the webinar series free of charge on our website. And for those that are participating in the webinar live, please take a moment to complete the survey that's going to pop up on your screen as soon as we finish up. With that, I'd like to again thank Megan and Darla and all of you out there for participating tonight. Thank you and have a great evening.